Good afternoon. Then Yaakov continues. Amar Rav Huna. Rav Huna says, Harogil Bener, someone who is accustomed to lighting candles, Havin Le Banim Talmidei Chachamim, will have children who are Torah scholars. So we'll discuss in a few minutes what does it mean, rugil, which I translated as accustomed, although as we'll see, some of the commentators understand it a little bit differently than just accustomed. Secondly, I said someone who's accustomed to lighting candles. Now, actually, there is a bit of a disagreement among the Mefarshim as to whether this is referring specifically to Ner Chanukah. Some even have the text in the Gemara with the word Chanukah written in. Some understand this as speaking specifically about Shabbos candles. And there are even those who say that it's talking about both. Rashi, for example, makes it clear that this is referring to both Shabbos candles as well as Hanukkah candles. And he says that because since the pasuk says in Mishlei, Kiner mitzvah v'Torah or, that a mitzvah is a candle and Torah is light, so therefore there's a connection between candles and Torah, and that's why somebody who is diligent about his candle lighting, commensurately his children will be Torah scholars. And we'll discuss some more about this momentarily. The Gemara goes on. Hazohir, someone who is careful about mezuzah, zochel ledira noeh, he will merit to have a nice home. And this is what we call midah keneged midah, measure for measure. Since he's careful about the mezuzah on the door of his home, commensurately ends up with a nice home. Hazahir betzitzis, someone who is careful about the mitzvah of tzitzis, zochel etalis noeh, he merits to have nice clothing. Same idea. You do the mitzvah on your clothing, so commensurately you get clothing. And Hazahir bekiddush hayom, someone who is careful about Kiddush on Shabbos and Yom Tov, which means that he's careful to recite Kiddush and Shabbos and Yom Tov over wine and not over bread. Zoche, he merits, umimale darve yayin, and he fills up barrels of wine. As I mentioned, there's a lot to unpack over here, so let's take some time and go through it. Those who understand that the Gemara is speaking specifically about Hanukkah candles, that someone who's diligent about Hanukkah candles will have children who are Torah scholars. So the reason is because the Yevanim, the Syrian Greeks, they tried to stop the Jewish people from Torah study. Again, that's a lengthy discussion, which we're not going to get into now. So therefore, someone who is diligent about commemorating the incident of Hanukkah, he will therefore have children who are diligent in their Torah study. If you'll notice over here, when it came to the candles, it said harugil, which I translate as someone who's accustomed, as opposed to the other things that we discussed over here, mezuzah, tzitzis, and wine. It said hazahir, one who is careful. So the Ein Yaakov explains that over here we're not talking about that someone is careful to do the mitzvah of candle lighting on Shabbos, but rather means rather than just lighting one candle on Shabbos, what the person does is he makes sure to light many candles on Shabbos. And the significance of that, he explains, is because back in the good old days, before they had electric lighting, so came Friday night, lights went off, and your Torah learning opportunities were taken away from you. And I'm going to add to what he says. If you want your children to enjoy learning Torah, the best way to accomplish that is by showing them your enjoyment in learning Torah and the importance that you attribute to Torah study. So therefore, somebody who lights many candles in his home on Friday night, making there to be enough light in his house that he can then sit down Friday night after the meal and have a good time studying Torah, that's going to influence his children and increase their desire to study Torah, and they will be Torah scholars as well. Others explain that it's talking about, again, whether we're discussing the Hanukkah candles or the Shabbos candles, that you put in more oil than is necessary, or if you're using candles, someone explained it means you use especially nice candles. The Meiri says it's referring to somebody who, when he performs the mitzvah, does it in a way which shows his love and appreciation for the mitzvah. And again, the same thing, if you want to influence your children, that mitzvahs should be something that is both important to them and they feel a strong attachment to that, the best way to accomplish that is by doing the mitzvahs in a way which shows how much you love them. The Pri Chodesh, we're going to skip the Pri Chodesh right now. The Rashi, as I mentioned beforehand, says that's because it says Ner Mitzvah V'Torah Or, and therefore the Chidushei HaRim points out that because there is a correlation between your Hanukkah lighting and the your children becoming Talmidei Chachamim and the study of Torah, therefore one should go ahead and ensure that he studies Torah right next to the burning Hanukkah candles. If we take the discussion back to Shabbos candles for a moment, now the Ein Yaakov had skipped the previous lines of the Gemara, but the previous lines of the Gemara had discussed that the reason why we light candles on Friday night is for the sake of Shalom Bayis, so that there should be peace in the home. And the Shalom HaKadosh brings the Sefer Reishis Chachma, who quotes his Rebbe, the Ramak, Rav Moshe Cordovero, who says that on Friday afternoon, a person should get rid of all of the cobwebs in the house. And he says there's a Kabbalistic reason for getting rid of cobwebs. And then prepare the house with candles that are burning and a bed which is made nicely. And then he goes on to quote that the Reishis Chachma says, I'll explain to you what the idea is. We know that Shabbos is called the Shabbos Queen, Shabbos Malchusa. And Malchus, when we refer to the Sfiros, the final one of the Sfiros is called Malchus. And Malchus is also referred to as Bayis, the home. Because unlike the other Sfiros, the other 10 spiritual forces, each one of which brings something different to the table, the concept of Malchus is that it is the receptacle within which all of the other Sfiros can act. And the result is whenever there is a place where holiness gathers, there's always forces of negativity that try to destroy that. In Kabbalistic terms, they're referred to as the klipos. And so over here, when it comes to Friday night, and it comes to the Shabbos Queen, and you very much want to create an atmosphere of peace, these klipos want to do whatever they can to destroy that atmosphere of peace. And we refer to the korei achbish, the cobwebs. Those are the cobwebs that we've got to get rid of. Lahavir gilula min haaretz, remove all of the negativity, all of the anti-peace forces from within your home. And furthermore, he also points out that Shabbos is also referred to as a kala, as a bribe, but the word kala can also be understood as a term meaning inclusive, because Friday night, as we said, Malchus, that contains within it and includes all these different forces of holiness, of all of the spheros, really that represents all of the holiness that we manage to accrue and gather together over the course of the year. The Chayet, who was another early Kabbalist, explains that Shabbos represents the 7th millennium, the time when right now the full force of light, of the spiritual influence on the world we don't feel. And many of you are familiar with the famous midrashim about the light of the moon being diminished. But on that 7th millennium, again, that Shabbos symbolizes, that's going to be a time when the light of the moon is going to be a perfect reflection of the light of the sun. And light, spiritual outpouring will be much more manifest than it is today. And therefore, to symbolize that, we increase the quantity of light that we experience on Friday night as well. The Sefer Yichud HaShabbos brought down something very beautiful from Shmuel Halevi Vosner. He points out that it says over here that if you're careful about Neiros, if you're careful about the candles, you're going to have a son who is a Talmid Chacham, which normally is translated as a Torah scholar. But he points out it doesn't just use the word Chacham, a wise person, a knowledgeable person, but it calls him a Talmid Chacham. Similarly, we find a Gemara which is repeated a number of places that Talmidei Chachamim Marbim Shalom Ba'olam. Talmidei Chachamim increase peace in the world. And he explains, because a Talmid Chacham, someone who's both a student and a wise person, that's the literal meaning, he is someone who both receives Torah from others as a Talmid, and as a Chacham, he also gives his Torah knowledge and shares it with others. Someone who's only a Chacham thinks that he knows everything and is frequently very stubborn in his ways and doesn't want to hear anybody correct him or suggest a change in his understanding. He doesn't increase peace in the world. Someone who's only a Talmid, a student, and has never really grown to the stature of his teacher and be able to take what he's learned and really assimilate it with inside himself and make it his own, he's always going to be making mistakes. And consequently, he's going to increase disagreements because he doesn't understand fully and properly what his Rebbe taught. Until you've actually taken what your Rebbe taught and made it your own, you haven't understood it properly. It's only someone who's both a Talmid and a Chacham, someone who can learn from others but also give to others. He's someone who really brings that shalom, that peace into the world. And that's why someone who is careful about a ner, from the perspective of how the Gemara always describes it, consists of two parts. It has the container that holds the oil, and then the oil and the flame itself. It's both a mikabel, a recipient, because it holds the oil, and then it's mashpia, it gives out the fire, it gives out the warmth and the light. So someone who is careful about Ner, he will have a son who is a Talmid Chacham, who also represents that blend of receiving and giving. Thank you so much for listening, and a Freilich and Chanukah to all.